Why do you think that the state has failed to take more action? I mean, it's an issue that the constituents, I'm sure, throughout the state are concerned about. Certainly if they watch TV, whether it's regular news or if they watch cable news, there's a lot of talk about Illinois. You know, they tend to neglect all the wonderful things about our state and the people that are doing good. From the alt guilds way back on up to the present. How come our state legislators are so moribund in this particular situation?
Well, in this particular case, it's what are called the four tops. It's the legislative leaders. And the principal piece of legislation still pending is to get campaign finance reform. So I can't give you a bribe and then have you give me a contract once you become elected. The reason the four tops are against it is that it limits their ability to make contributions to campaigns. They collect money from every interest group in the state, and then they parcel it out to those legislative races that they think are important to continue control or to gain control in the legislature. And frankly, that tens of millions of dollars that they use, they don't want to give up. The legislation would have limited them to $30,000 or less in campaign contributions. In a contested race, they sometimes give $500,000 in support to a local candidate for state legislature.
Well, who are the four tops right now?
Well, they're the Democratic and Republican leaders. The two most important are Michael Madigan, who heads the House, and John Cullerton, who heads the Senate. If even those two players would agree to the Quinn Commission proposals, we would make a major step forward. But we're really not going to wait for the leaders in Springfield any longer. They've already failed to act. So what we're doing is we're beginning to translate the legislation into city council and county board legislation. And citizens here locally are going to have a chance to push for major reform that they're not getting from the state.
How's this going to happen?
Well, it'll be introduced about December, just in time for the upcoming election.
This will be introduced in the city council by an alderman.
Be introduced in the city council by a group of aldermen and in the county board by a group of commissioners. There'll be parallel legislation running at the same time. And what we're doing is essentially translating the Quinn legislation, the commission legislation, which ran 100 pages, into local ordinances, and they will be introduced. And I think if they become a contention in the current race, particularly for county board president, it's likely that they will be passed at the local level and at least clean up some of Chicago and Cook County's corruption, which is about half or two-thirds of the corruption in the state.
Where is Quinn on the four tops situation? Is he one of the four tops? Is he a variable in the group?
Quinn is in support of the proposals of his commission, the Reform Commission, that met all last year and produced the legislation, and Quinn would sign all of the legislation if it could get to his desk. He's negotiating or fighting with the legislative leaders at the moment. He vetoed a very weak bill that had come out of the state legislature. They're now negotiating in the override session, and we'll see in 2 weeks whether or not they pass anything.
Dick Simpson, what is your general take on our new governor so far?
Well, Pat tries to do what's right, and he works very hard at it. He's been successful in a number of measures, but he's very constrained. The state budget is still a mess. The estimates vary between a $10 billion and a $12 billion deficit. And the legislature refuses to pass the income tax increase. Even the income tax increase would only erase $1 billion or $2 billion, but that would be a major step forward. So in a very difficult situation, I think Pat is doing a very credible job. He needs much more help from the legislature than he's getting.
What do you think his prospects are on getting not only renominated, but also his chances of victory?
Well, I was amazed that the Democratic Party of Cook County endorsed Pat Quinn for re-election.
I was too. That's great.
I can't think of when they last did that for, they never did it for Harold Washington or any other progressive or reformer for major office. If that means they will actually do some work for him, he will be reelected. Dan Hines is running on a pretty strong platform, but he really hasn't made commitments, and some of the commitments he's making don't really make quite sense. What Dan Hines says to solve our problem is we ought to tax the rich more, but not raise the income tax on anybody else. Well, that sounds good, but the number of people who make more than $200,000 in the state of Illinois a year is not large enough to fund the $12 billion gap. So I've never heard a very good explanation of how that solves the state gap. And that affects everything. That affects social services, it affects the universities, it affects students, it affects the CTA, Metro, all our transportation systems, all our road repairs on the major highways. It's a very serious problem, and I'm not convinced yet that Hines has a good solution. But whether the voters will be, I'm not sure.
Were you at all surprised that Hines got into the race? I mean, there was some talk of him running for the Senate, I believe. I know he comes out of a political family, one that his dad opposed Harold Washington, as I recall. That's one thing that sticks out in my mind about the Hineses. I just wondered why you think he's going for running for governor.
I think because he thinks he can win. It's an easier seat. The Senate race is a little more hazardous with Mark Kirk running as a leading Republican. It'll be much harder on winning on the Senate side.
If you had to predict who will win the race, who will get the nomination, who will win, can you do that?
Well, the primary is early February, and at this point I can't. I think it'll be a fairly close race. At the moment, I would say, because of all the publicity he gets, that Quinn is doing slightly better.
All right, let's move over to the county board. There's a lot of people running for the president of the county board. We have Tony Preckwinkle, we have Danny Davis, we have a number of other people. Can you give us a little overview of that race, who's running and what you think the issues are, and who might be someone to watch?
Well, the surprise announcement that's happening simultaneously with this radio broadcast this morning is Tom Tresser, who led the No Game Chicago, is declaring for county board president as we sit here, which makes it an interesting race. There are 3 African Americans running for the slot as of this morning, and 2 whites running for the slot. It means that racial politics isn't an easy predictor here. Todd Stroger has the machine vote of what might be called the plantation politics of the South Side, not so much the West Side, but he also got the endorsement of 300 ministers who lead the black churches who are most dependent upon the public trough in the South Side particularly, but some West Side ministers. So he starts with a couple of 100,000 votes potentially just from the machine guys that would support him on the North Side, the Barrios types, and the black leadership of what might be called plantation politics. There are 2 challengers to him in the black community, Tony Preckwinkle and Danny Davis, both of whom can appeal to a rainbow coalition of whites and Latinos, particularly whites. Their outreach in the Latino community is less strong. So you will have a 3-way race with the African American candidates. It's unclear whether Danny Davis at the last moment will decide to keep the congressional seat or go ahead with the county board president race. On the white side, you've got the O'Brien, who's head of the Metropolitan Water Sanitation District, which almost no one pays attention to, but he is being backed by a number of the white ward committeemen. And so he has a substantial base. And Tom Tresser is hoping to come off of defeating the Olympics and using that publicity to sponsor his campaign. His great difficulty, as it is for many of the candidates trying to run, is it requires 8,100 signatures to get on the petitions, to get on the ballot. And that means for a person who isn't a machine candidate, you have to have twice or 3 times that, say 16 to 24,000 signatures. There's less than 2 weeks left, and whether that can actually be accomplished, many of these people do not have a strong grassroots organization. So whether they'll all get on the ballot is really the first test in the county board president race.
What's with Dorothy Brown? She's not running now?
She is still in the race. I don't think Dorothy Brown has much support,
right?
Because she's lost twice before in different races. She is a well-known figure. She does have good press identification, and she has personal supporters in the African American community. but I don't see her as one of the major contenders.
I just want to get your take on Tom Dresser about his. I mean, he led the fight against the Olympics. I don't know if what he did really affected the final decision. In us not getting it here for Chicago. Do you think he has a lot of support off of that?
Well, he also has worked. He's in the near north side, and they work very hard to block a school getting a soccer field in the park next door. And so he has a cadre of people from there. He has the remnants of some reform organizations in the 42nd and 43rd Ward. The real question is, were there enough people in no games to get the petition signed? That will be his hardest challenge.